today's World of Tanks console update news is going to take a slight twist from what we usually do, and I'm going to open up a discussion to you guys about whether or not you think Wargaming got this wrong. And that is of course the introduction of Cold War and the introduction of modern vehicles into World of Tanks console Modern Armour. Now, of course, we have got the brand new British Cold War tanks that we will feature throughout this video, but I want to ask whether or not Wargaming have been introducing these new or post-war tanks, which are essentially tanks that are already in the game, as a separate matchmaker, but basically they're all tanks that could just play in the standard game mode, and that's no different within this. And we have, of course, got, with the new tanks within Cold War, the Charioteer, which of course is a tier 8 in World of Tanks World War II, and we have the FE4004 Conway along with the FE4005 Stage 2, which is of course the tier 10 tank destroyer from the British line. Obviously all exactly the same tanks. Yes, they'll probably have some slight differences where they've kind of altered the alpha damage so that they meet the same kind of level within Cold War and some of the other tanks within it. However, they are essentially the exact same kind of tank, and so yeah, I don't know how I feel about Wargaming basically introducing content that is exactly the same, because what it feels like that they've done is, instead of just introducing these tanks like the new light tanks that are actually in the game, and these tanks are actually completely new, with the first one starting from the Centurion Mark II, leading into the Scorpion, the FE101, and what that's basically done is that, yeah, you have vehicles that lead on from the traditional tanks within the game, but with that, what you've then got is, well, why couldn't you just add them into the game at, say, a tier 11? And that's where I think Wargaming have really gone wrong. Separating the two game modes into two separate kind of, you either play Cold War or you either play World War II, is something that I think has kind of divided the community, and I think then you're ending up with lower queue times in both of them, whereas if you just introduce them as tier 11, 12, 13, whatever the case may be, if you added extra tiers within the game to kind of cope with it, you then wouldn't have this kind of multi-layered development that's going on currently. And it seems like all Cold War was really there to do, and the barrier to putting these tanks within World War II, and just instead of calling it World War II, just having it as the base game, that is the big game, you can go up to tier 12 or whatever it is, because before this we didn't have World of Tanks World War II, do you know what I mean? It was just World of Tanks console. And so what's happened now is, I think a lot of players, this has distanced them. Players either play World War II or they play Cold War. Yes, you get a bit of mix, and I play Cold War only to earn silver, essentially. I don't play it because I enjoy it. And I think that what it's been there to do is they came up with this idea for True Vision, which, yes, it works to a degree within Cold War, but I just feel like they couldn't get it through on the World War II, so then they just made a whole new game mode to put it onto, which, why not just make it that you could play either World War II with or without True Vision? Was it because no one would play it if it was just True Vision and that there weren't any other novel aspects? I don't know. But that's kind of my view on it, and why I think Wargaming kind of got that wrong. So obviously I want to know what your opinions are, but before we do that, let's look at the actual tanks themselves. Obviously we all know about the FE4005 Stage 2, we've done a video on it on the channel not long ago. Conway is basically a kind of exactly the same premise, except the alpha damage on this gun is not as much, and then the Charioteer we've done a video of probably 2 months ago, so you can go back and have a look at that if you just type in what console into YouTube and then Charioteer. Then of course we have the light tanks. We have the FE101 Scorpion, which appears to be a lead off straight from the Centurion, and these lines basically go off of each other. I'm sure that these tanks will basically have similar sort of guns to what you can see on the common Cold War light tanks. This is obviously the post-war, so these are tanks that came after World War II, and so it's kind of a mix of, well, you could just add these in. But what this tank will probably have is, by the looks of it, a 90mm that you'll be able to use on it. It may have an autoloader, it may not. Obviously this is going to be, well, it has a 76mm gun here even. So you can actually get this within the game as soon as the update drops on Tuesday. So that is, of course, today is the recording of this video. You can have a look at these tanks in the game. Obviously then this tank then leads on to the FV107 Scimitar. This has a 30mm L2 cannon as its main gun. This in World of Tanks console will probably have an autoloader because that's how Wargaming tend to work these tanks. If they give them basically a really low caliber gun, they tend to have autoloaders. Whether or not that's the same thing, I don't know. It's usually because in real life these are kind of fast firing guns, and so they basically make it an autoloader. In the next one we have the Scorpion 90. This features a 90mm gun instead of the 30mm, so it's going to be much nicer probably to play than the previous one. And so yeah, you've got the good view range I expect, and the ability to actually hit opponents for nothing more than just like 85 damage or probably 100 damage, which you could do with the Scimitar. Then we have the Vickers FMV5, which is the top tier 1 equivalent to the Detente era in Cold War, and so you'll be able to play this. It's much like the Stingray, I guess, in the design at what it looks like, and it will have a 105mm gun, probably 390 alpha, maybe even 480. I don't know how Wargaming will work the damage numbers, but obviously you can cover that within the game when you get onto it. But coming back to the whole decision making of Wargaming, a lot of these tanks, yes, they're newer, yes, Wargaming wanted to separate out the game modes, but do you feel like you would have rather have seen these tanks come into the game at tier 11, at tier 12, even tier 13? And do you think that that would have been a better way to do it? Because after reflection and upon reflection, I just think that I would much rather have been able to kind of play these tanks, because they're spending so much development time putting their kind of things into this that it seems like only a certain percentage of the games, well, the people playing their game, are actually getting an opportunity to try these out, because I'm never going to be able to grind through Cold War. I don't enjoy the gameplay. I only have just about enough time to play World War II, and so trying to grind through a whole load more tanks that are kind of in a different game mode where I haven't really done much in terms of research, and then you've got to then earn nearly 10 million silver, which yes is easily done, but if you're only playing Cold War, so can't really use the silver reserves that I would have had on World War II because they just aren't enough, and so I think that that's where the problem lies. I would have much rather seen these just come in at tier 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, whatever their number of tiers that they would have just added on. I think it would have been a better way. That way, you know, you've got a bit of new content that people could have played. I think that that would have been a much better implementation of this system, and considering a lot of these are just tanks that were already in the game, why not just put them at tier 11 where, you know, these next tanks come after or in the line of the current game mode, and therefore you haven't got this split in player base. Obviously, your opinion may differ massively. I'm just one player that plays this game. Yes, I have, 8,000 followers, but which is crazy, by the way. But that doesn't mean that my opinion's better than any of you or 8,000 of you. So yeah, it doesn't mean much. All I'm wanting to really open up is the idea of maybe in the future, Wargaming will look to create both this game mode, Cold War, that you can play if you want to, and then also introduce these tanks into World War II. I would have much rather have had that. And then you've just got, instead of having World War II and Cold War, you've got True Vision, and then you've got not True Vision. So I think that would be an interesting way to do it. But of course, I don't know what Wargaming will do and whether they'll even listen to any of this. But there we go. Hopefully you did enjoy this video. If you did, taking a first look at the tanks coming in, then leave a like, and of course subscribe if you aren't already to keep up to date with all the news and all of the information regarding World of Tanks console for this month and the future year that's to come in World of Tanks 2022. Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day and you'll join me back for the next video. Goodbye.